Technology is the most powerful change in the world of education.
Everything changes.
Welcome to the Emerging Technologies in Education podcast, delivered to you by Clever Books Company.
Dear listeners, thank you for joining Emerging Technologies in Education podcast series. And we have Susan today, and I want to give Susan the word to introduce herself, tell which country she's coming from, and a little bit about her background.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Susan Bearden, and I am the Digital Equity Project Director for the Consortium for School Networking, which is an advocacy and support group for school technology leaders here in the United States. And I am a former school technology director, and also I spent a year as a senior fellow at the U.S. Department of Education in the Office of Educational Technology.
That's impressive, Susan. I have the feeling we're going to have quite an interesting conversation here. And I want to start with a question which could be quite challenging. Are you positive or negative in regards to using technology for educational purposes? And if you can elaborate a little bit on that, why?
Absolutely. Well, on the whole, yes, I'm definitely positive about using technology for educational purposes. But technology has to be implemented thoughtfully and with a purpose, and not just because it's the thing to do or because it's bright, shiny, or because that's what other schools are doing. Because technology can be a very powerful tool, but technology is an amplifier. Technology in and of itself does not improve education. Technology can be used in combination with great pedagogy to create great educational outcomes. So, and not all technology uses are the same. There's a big difference between students who use technology actively in the classroom, using it to create, to collaborate, to share their student voice, to connect with other education or other professionals online, or to code, or to actually create digital media. There's a big difference between using technology actively in those ways versus just using it to passively consume videos or to do what we call drill and kill test preparation. So yes, I do believe technology can be an incredibly powerful tool, but what really matters is how it is used.
I would totally agree with you on this point. I think that the teacher and the personality of the teacher will always remain in the classroom. And I think the teacher is one of the key elements of the whole educational process as the facilitator. And the technology could be another good tool, like books, like smart boards, like anything he's already using in the classroom as an instrument to deliver the information the most efficient way for the students.
Absolutely. Technology, in my mind, is never going to replace a great teacher. And I would rather have a great teacher teaching my child than someone who is a technology whiz but is not a great teacher.
It's kind of similar type of comparison to that is that you can go to the fantastic hospital with the whole modern technological advanced machines and everything. And if they're not in the hands of the professional or the person who really knows how to use them and knows how to cure people, it will be a really challenging situation to recover in that hospital.
That's a great analogy. I'm going to remember that. Thank you for sharing.
It just came up to me during the conversation because it's pretty much same. And I have another question to you. So as we're talking, we're positive about the technology. Would you mind sharing some specific trends or maybe tools that you think you find for yourself as an adult or maybe for the kids being beneficial for the educational processes?
Well, I think any tool that allows students to use technology actively to create content, to collaborate or communicate with others is going to be a great tool. So I'm platform agnostic. I don't think, I think that, Windows PCs and Chromebooks and iPads can all be great educational tools if they're used properly. So I'm platform agnostic. I think that both Microsoft and Google have great tools in their platforms. So for me, it's really about how the tool is used and are students using those tools to actively create content. There's some great tools out there, whether students are creating video or using a tool like Flipgrid, which is just in the news actually as we're recording this podcast. Microsoft recently purchased the Flipgrid company and they're making it free for educators. And I know that's a very popular tool in terms of encouraging students to share their voice and to communicate that way. Video tools like iMovie or different green screen apps, those can be great ways for students to create content. Collaborative platforms such as Google Docs or the Microsoft Office 365 suite, if the kids are actually working on projects collaboratively, those can all be great tools. It's really about how the tool is being used and are the kids using it to actually create content and collaborate with others.
Yeah, it's a good point here. And I'm also thinking to ask you the question, the collaborative tools is something that is already existing for a while. And I would have a question specifically to something like emerging technologies, like 3D printing, for example, or maybe AR, VR. Do you have an idea, is it going to be like a massive trend, mainstream, or it still will remain something like nice to have?
I think that AR, VR, that's augmented reality or virtual reality for those who aren't familiar with the terms, I think that they have a lot of maturing to do and they're not mainstream currently. I don't know, perhaps at some point they will be. There are some trends that I have seen becoming more mainstream, such as makerspaces or 3D printing, or even teaching computer science in the classroom, having kids do coding activities. Those are becoming more mainstream, but it's still not, you're not going to find those activities in every school or in every classroom in the United States. So it's important to recognize that we've got, ways to go in terms of really implementing education technology well in the classroom here in the U.S. There are some schools that are doing a terrific job, and then there are some schools that are at a very early stage in their sort of evolution in terms of using technology in the classroom. So it's important to recognize that not all students currently have equal access to these tools. It will be interesting to see kind of what happens with augmented reality and virtual reality, but I don't know that, like I said, it's going to be mainstream in every classroom in the immediate future.
Also, like if we think of 3D printing, it wasn't mainstream or something like super popular even several years ago, because when it was new, people tried it, somebody liked it, but this is the technology in itself, and it's and you had a good point out there, like how you actually use it, and if it actually covers the needs of the education process, and if it's going to be helpful with that. And I have another question too, like using the case that you are in the US. I wanted to ask you, how do you see overall the situation with technology in the classroom in the US, from your observation, your point of view, and do you see it changing in the nearest future, like 5-10 years from now?
There's been a lot of progress that's been made. A big part of that has been the push to connect U.S. schools to high-speed broadband. There, a few years ago, the E-rate program, which is a federal funding source for supplementing technology in schools, was updated, and it was modified so that schools could use those funds for upgrading their internal networks, as well as for paying, for instance, the cost of having the monthly broadband subscription. And that has, because of that funding, that we have made great progress in terms of connecting America's schools to high-speed broadband. There are still some schools in really rural areas in particular that struggle and don't have enough broadband capacity. So I have seen a lot of progress because, of course, the first step in being able to really use technology well in the classroom is to make sure that you have the adequate network infrastructure, the adequate bandwidth in order to use those tools. And then after that, then you need to talk about having adequate devices, and then you need to talk about having adequate teacher training. So while there has been tremendous progress made in terms of connectivity, I think we're now at a state where we need to focus more on the teacher professional development and helping teachers use technology well in the classroom. So there's huge variation, as I imagine there may be in other countries, in that there are some districts and schools that have, one laptop for every student, and then there are others who are just limited to having students in computer labs. There's great variation. So I have seen a lot of progress in terms of how technology is being used in the classroom, but definitely there's still a long way to go. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, I think that the point here is that the teacher education, because there are a lot of companies out there, they're providing so many technological tools and everything for the teachers, and there are so many trends, and it's so difficult with the educators' busy life to follow up with them and to check them out, and more even than that, because majority of the teachers, especially if they're not like super young generation, they might be not tech savvy, and it is needed to have the CPD and different courses for them, because I think it's important for the companies who provide those tools, like we do, for example. We do provide the CPD course attached to what we do, and it's not only covering our products, but general the industry and trends, so they can educate themselves, like free of charge, to the level that they need to keep up with the emerging trends, because there are so many technologies out there. And I have another question to you. Like me and you, we are for education and for technology-based in education. But sometimes you might meet people who will say like, "Oh, I'm not really interested in using technology for the classroom," and I think it's like it doesn't. There is no need to have the technology in the classroom at all. Would you try to persuade this person who is pushing back to technology and try to put on your side, or what would you advise? How would you encourage them to start using technology for education?
That's a great question. I think it's important to remember that people always view technology through the lens of their own education. So it's difficult, I think, a lot of times for people to imagine using technology in education because they didn't necessarily use it when they were growing up, because a lot of these tools just didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. Certainly when I was in school, we didn't have access to computers or technology. So I think that's one challenge, but I think it's also important to remember that the majority of middle-paying jobs, I think I saw a statistic somewhere that here in the U.S., I think it was 80% of what are considered like middle-skill jobs require technology skills. And just as today, you wouldn't imagine running a business without having email or a website, even though, 40, 50 years ago, people were running businesses with emails or without email or website.
Oh, yeah.
But times have changed. Times have changed. So now having email or having a website, using technology, being able to sell products online, that's just kind of assumed. That's just kind of what's part of doing business today, having access to those tools and those skills. And it's the same thing with education, is that we are preparing our students for a very different time and a very different economy than when we were in school. And certainly our students need the opportunity to develop digital skills, digital literacies, and to be able to leverage the power of technology. And it's important to remember that not all students have equal access to technology at home. And that's one of the challenges here in the U.S. is we have many students who don't have internet access at home, either because their families can't afford it or because they are in a rural area and high-speed broadband just isn't available. They may only be limited to having a cell phone for home internet access. And so people talk about students as being digital natives, but the reality is there's a huge variation in the types of digital skills that students learn at home or have access to before they come to school. And secondly, even if they are very fluent in using social media platforms, that doesn't mean that they know how to use technology for learning. That doesn't mean that they know that they're really basically digitally literate, or that they know how to create a good media presentation, or that they know how to collaborate well with others online or communicate in online spaces, or even take an online course. It doesn't mean that they know how to do a good web search, that they know how to identify the difference between real and fake news. So it's important to realize that we are preparing kids for a very, very different time than when we were in school. And so we need to make sure that we are not strictly looking at education through the lens of our own educational experiences. And that's what I would tell people, is that, just back when, 40 years ago, people weren't expected to know how to create PowerPoint presentations or, manipulate Excel spreadsheets in the business world. But, those are all standard skills that people are expected to have in a lot of jobs today. So that's how I would definitely phrase the conversation.
Yeah, you're right, Les. And by the way, you touched one of the points that I found quite interesting. I'm traveling a lot, and recently I was reading an article in the newspaper on the plane, which I found quite frustrating. And as you touched that point, I want to mention that it was the research conducted in Europe, and the research shows that one kid out of 50 is able to actually identify if the news delivered to him are fake or true. And this is so frustrating. This is like essential skill is missing, like critical thinking here.
Yes, absolutely. I think that digital literacies are a critical part of the curriculum, especially in today's day and age. And this is, just another case where the technology is advancing faster than our ability to educate our students on how to use it wisely. And so, yes, in fact, I had actually written a book on digital citizenship 2 years ago called Digital Citizenship, a Community-Based Approach. And I talk about digital literacies as part of the larger digital citizenship framework and the importance of digital citizenship education, because absolutely it's important for kids to learn how to be critical thinkers, how to evaluate stuff they're reading online. Just because it's on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And also how to be able to engage respectfully with others. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, our students have no shortage of terrible online role models when it comes to interacting with others in digital spaces. And so it's important that we teach students how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also it's important to use technology, and not only technology, like common sense, to teach kids on how to use that and how to identify and just look at the world in a different perspective. Because I was also, when I was at school, I didn't have access to any computers as well. And we were accessing the world through the books. And I understand that right now for kids, it's so difficult to identify what is true, what is not true, because there is internet out there with lots of resources who claim to be truthful, but also like books and everything else. And then they are overloaded with this information. They need to have this critical thinking skills. They need to have analytical skills and a lot more. Thank you so much, Susan. It was like a great pleasure talking to you. And I think the podcast was really brilliant and thoughtful, which is most important thing. And I'd like to thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Everything changes.